My name is Paloma Herrera. I'm 34 years old, and as I walked down the aisle of the beautiful Cathedral of Guadalajara 3 months ago, I whispered something to my mother that made her face turn completely pale. What I told her in that moment was the culmination of years of pain, rejection, and a secret that would change our family forever. But before I reveal what happened on that wedding day, let me tell you how a mysterious envelope I found in my grandmother's old purse led me to discover the truth that would vindicate me in the most public way possible. Have you ever had a parent who seemed to take pleasure in diminishing your dreams? Someone who made you feel like you weren't worthy of love or happiness? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below, because what happened to me might resonate with your own story. Growing up in Polanco, one of Mexico City's most exclusive neighborhoods, I was always the disappointment in the Herrera family. My mother, Carmen Herrera, never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was different from my sisters. While my older sister Sofia was a successful lawyer married to a prominent businessman, and my younger sister Isabella was a doctor engaged to a surgeon, I was the problem child, who chose to become a social worker. Paloma, my mother would say with that tone of exasperation I knew so well. Look at your sisters. They married well, they have successful careers that matter. And you work with poor people for pennies. No decent man from a good family will ever want to marry someone like you. You're too stubborn, too independent, too different. These words echoed in my mind every family gathering, every holiday, every time I walked into our family's grand house on Avenida Presidente Masaryk. The house where my father had built his textile empire, where my mother hosted elaborate parties for Mexico City's elite, where I always felt like an outsider despite being born into it. My mother's favorite phrase, the one that cut deepest, was always, "Nadie se casará con una chica como tú. No one will marry a girl like you." She said it when I turned down dates she arranged with sons of her friends. She said it when I chose to work in Iztapalapa instead of taking a position at my father's company. She said it when I moved to my own apartment in Roma Norte instead of staying in the family mansion. What my mother didn't know was that I had been quietly dating someone for 2 years. Someone she had never met, someone who loved me exactly as I was. But there was something else she didn't know, something I had discovered just 6 months before my wedding day, hidden in my late grandmother's belongings. The discovery happened on a rainy afternoon in March. I was helping clean out my grandmother Elena's house in Cuacán, the house where I had spent countless afternoons as a child, listening to her stories and feeling unconditionally loved. As I was going through her old jewelry box, I found a sealed envelope tucked behind a false bottom. My name was written on it in her careful handwriting. Para mi querida Paloma, para abrir cuando necesites la verdad. Inside was a letter that made my hands shake as I read it. But more importantly, there was a document that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, about my mother's treatment of me, and about why I had always been the different one. What I didn't know was that this document would become the key to my vindication, and that the truth it contained would be revealed in the most dramatic way possible. The letter from my grandmother explained everything. Why my mother had always treated me differently. Why I looked different from my sisters. Why I had always felt like I didn't quite belong. The document was a birth certificate, not mine, but one that revealed a family secret that had been hidden for over 30 years. As I sat in my grandmother's old rocking chair, reading her words through tears, I realized that everything I had believed about myself and my place in the family was built on a lie. My grandmother wrote, "Mi querida Paloma, your mother has carried this secret for too long, and it has poisoned her heart against you. You deserve to know the truth about who you are and why you have always been special in ways she couldn't accept." The birth certificate revealed that my father, Roberto Herrera, was not my biological father. My real father was a man named Diego Morales, a teacher from Oaxaca whom my mother had loved deeply before she married into the wealthy Herrera family. The document showed that I was born 6 months before my parents' wedding, and that my mother had passed me off as premature to hide the truth. But there was more. My grandmother's letter revealed that Diego Morales hadn't abandoned my mother as she had always claimed. He had fought for her, had wanted to marry her, but my grandmother Carmen had chosen wealth and social status over love. She had told Diego that she was marrying Roberto and that he should never contact her again. What she never told him was that she was pregnant with his child. The most shocking revelation was the last paragraph of my grandmother's letter. "Diego never stopped loving your mother and he never stopped asking about you." He became a successful educator, founded several schools for indigenous children, and won national recognition for his work. He died 2 years ago, but he left something for you. There's a trust fund, Mija. He saved money his entire life hoping to one day meet his daughter. The lawyer's information is in this envelope. I stared at the lawyer's business card, my mind reeling. Not only had I discovered the truth about my parentage, but I had also learned that my biological father had left me an inheritance. The irony was overwhelming. My mother had always criticized me for working with underprivileged communities, not knowing that this passion came from my real father, a man who had dedicated his life to education and social justice. But what struck me most was understanding why my mother had always been so harsh with me. Every time she looked at me, she saw Diego. She saw the man she had loved but given up for social status. She saw the choice she had made and the life she had sacrificed. Her cruelty toward me wasn't just about my life choices. It was about her own regret and the constant reminder of what she had lost. That night I made a decision. I would keep this secret until the right moment. I would use the time to process this information, to understand what it meant for my life, and to decide how to handle this revelation. What I didn't know was that the perfect moment would come sooner than I expected, and that it would be in front of our entire extended family and social circle. The trust fund my biological father had left me was substantial, enough to start my own nonprofit organization and expand my work helping underprivileged families. But more than the money, it was the validation that meant everything. A man I had never met had believed in me, had recognized the value of the work I was passionate about, and had supported my dreams even from a distance. The months following my discovery were a whirlwind of emotions and careful planning. I contacted Diego's lawyer, Licenciado Ramirez, who had been waiting years to find me. When I walked into his office in the historic center of Mexico City, he smiled with tears in his eyes and said, "You look exactly like your father, especially your eyes." He would have been so proud of the woman you've become. Diego Morales had indeed become everything my grandmother's letter described. He had founded 3 schools in rural Oaxaca, received the National Education Award from the President of Mexico, and had been featured in newspapers across the country for his innovative teaching methods with indigenous children. The lawyer showed me articles, photographs, and even a video of Diego receiving his award. Watching him speak about education and social justice, I felt like I was looking into a mirror of my own soul. "He talked about you constantly," Licenciado Ramirez told me. "He never married, never had other children. He said he was waiting for the day he could meet his daughter and tell her how proud he was that she had chosen to help others despite growing up in privilege. He followed your work from afar, you know. He had newspaper clippings about your community programs, photos from your organization's website. He knew exactly who you had become. The inheritance was more than money. It was a complete validation of everything I had ever believed about myself." Diego had left detailed letters explaining his vision for the funds, to support my work, to help me expand my programs, and to ensure that his daughter could continue the legacy of social justice he had built. Reading his words, I finally understood where my passion for helping others had come from. It wasn't rebellion against my family's values. It was DNA, it was heritage, it was love expressed across decades of separation. But the timing of this discovery couldn't have been more perfect, because I was about to get married to the most wonderful man I had ever met. His name was Alejandro Vega, and he was a veterinarian who ran a free clinic for pets in low-income neighborhoods. We had met 2 years earlier when I was organizing a community health fair in Nezahualcóyotl, and he was providing free vaccinations for animals. I had kept Alejandro's secret from my family because I knew exactly what my mother would say. He wasn't from the right social class, he didn't have family money, and his work helping animals in poor neighborhoods would be seen as beneath the Herrera family standards. But Alejandro was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: kind, compassionate, intelligent, and completely supportive of my work and dreams. When I finally told my family about Alejandro 6 months before our wedding, my mother's reaction was exactly what I had expected. "Por favor, Paloma. A veterinarian who works in the slums? This is exactly what I mean when I say no decent man will marry you. The only man who wants you is someone equally beneath our family's level." My father Roberto, the man who had raised me and whom I still loved despite everything, tried to be more diplomatic. "Mija, we just want you to be happy and secure. Are you sure this man can provide for you the way you deserve? What they didn't know was that I didn't need anyone to provide for me anymore. The trust fund from Diego gave me complete financial independence, and I was planning to use it to launch the largest community development program Mexico City had ever seen. But I decided to wait until our wedding day to reveal everything. The wedding planning became a battlefield. My mother wanted an elaborate celebration at the Club de Golf Mexico with 500 guests from high society. I wanted a smaller, more intimate ceremony that reflected our values. We compromised on the Cathedral of Guadalajara, a beautiful historic setting that satisfied her need for grandeur while allowing me to invite the community leaders, teachers, and social workers who had become my real family over the years. What my mother didn't realize was that I had been secretly planning a surprise that would unfold during the reception. I had invited some very special guests, people whose presence would shock everyone and reveal the truth about my heritage in the most dramatic way possible. 3 weeks before the wedding, during our final dress fitting, my mother made her cruelest comment yet. We were in the exclusive boutique in Polanco, surrounded by mirrors and expensive fabric, when she looked at me and said, "I just hope Alejandro doesn't realize what a mistake he's making. You've always been the disappointment of this family, Paloma. Your sisters married men who enhance their status. You're marrying someone who diminishes yours. Honestly, I'm surprised anyone agreed to marry you at all." Her words hit me like a physical blow, but this time instead of tears I felt something different: power. I had the truth now. I had proof of my worth, validation of my choices, and knowledge that would change everything. I looked at my mother in the mirror and said calmly, "We'll see about that, Mama. We'll see exactly what kind of mistake anyone is making." The mysterious envelope from my grandmother had contained one more surprise: a guest list of people my biological father had wanted me to meet. Teachers, community leaders, former students who had gone on to become doctors, lawyers, and engineers thanks to Diego's programs. People who knew my story and were eager to finally meet Diego Morales' daughter. I had contacted them all and invited them to my wedding. They would be sitting in a special section I had reserved, wearing small blue ribbons to identify themselves as friends of the family. What my mother didn't know was that these friends included some of the most respected educators and social activists in Mexico, people whose presence would make it clear that my bloodline was every bit as distinguished as the Herrera name, just in different ways. The week before the wedding, I received one final surprise. A package arrived at my apartment with a return address from Oaxaca. Inside was a beautiful indigenous textile, hand-woven in the traditional patterns of my father's region, along with a note from the women's cooperative he had helped establish. Para la hija de nuestro querido maestro Diego. This was made with love for your special day, to honor the man who changed our lives and the daughter who continues his legacy. As I held that textile, feeling the intricate work of these women's hands, I knew exactly how I would incorporate it into my wedding day. It would be my something special, a symbol of my true heritage that I would reveal at exactly the right moment. Little did my mother know that her daughter's wedding day would become the stage for the most dramatic revelation our family had ever experienced, and that her words about no one wanting to marry a girl like me would be turned back on her in front of everyone who mattered. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and clear in Guadalajara. As I sat in my hotel room having my hair and makeup done, I felt a strange sense of calm. Today would be the day everything changed, not just because I was marrying Alejandro, but because I was finally going to claim my true identity in front of everyone who had ever doubted me. My sisters Sofia and Isabella were with me, playing their roles as dutiful bridesmaids, but I could sense their underlying disapproval. They had made it clear that they thought I was making a mistake marrying beneath my station, as they put it. What they didn't know was that I was about to prove that my station was far more distinguished than any of them had ever imagined. "Paloma," Sofia said as she adjusted her bridesmaid dress, "it's not too late to reconsider. I mean, Alejandro seems nice enough, but think about your future. Think about your children's future. Do you really want them to grow up without the advantages that come from marrying into the right family?" I looked at her through the mirror where the makeup artist was applying my lipstick. "What advantages are those exactly?" I asked quietly. Isabella joined in, sitting on the bed behind me. "Social connections, business opportunities, financial security. The kind of things that matter in the real world. You can't live on love and good intentions forever." What my sisters didn't realize was that I now had more financial security than either of them had ever dreamed of. The trust fund from Diego was substantial enough that I could support myself and my work for decades without ever needing anyone else's money. But more than that, I had something they would never have: the knowledge that I came from a legacy of genuine impact and service. My mother arrived at the hotel room like a whirlwind of nervous energy and last-minute criticisms. She took one look at me and immediately began finding faults. "Your hair is too simple. That lipstick color is too bold. Are you sure about that necklace? It's not appropriate for a cathedral wedding." The necklace she was criticizing was a simple silver piece that had belonged to my grandmother Elena, the woman who had given me the truth and changed my life. I touched it gently and said, "This necklace is staying, Mama. It means more to me than you could possibly understand." "Everything with you has to be difficult, doesn't it?" she snapped. "Even on your wedding day, you can't just accept guidance from someone who knows better. This is exactly why I worry about your future with that man. You're too stubborn, too set in your ways. No wonder it took you so long to find someone willing to put up with you." Her words stung, but they also strengthened my resolve. Today would be the last day she would ever speak to me that way. Today the truth would finally set us all free. As we prepared to leave for the cathedral, I made one final check of my purse. Inside was a folded copy of my biological father's birth certificate, several newspaper clippings about his achievements, and a photo of him receiving the National Education Award. These documents would be my ammunition for the moment of truth that I had been planning for months. The ride to the Cathedral of Guadalajara was tense and quiet. My mother sat rigidly beside me in the limousine, occasionally making sharp comments about the traffic or the weather, but I could sense her underlying anxiety. Perhaps some part of her suspected that today would be different, that something significant was about to change in our family dynamic. When we arrived at the cathedral, I was amazed by what I saw. The beautiful colonial architecture was stunning, but what took my breath away was the sea of faces waiting for us. My special guests from Oaxaca were there, distinguished educators and community leaders wearing their blue ribbons, looking proud and emotional. Many of them had traveled hundreds of miles to be here, to finally meet Diego Morales' daughter on her wedding day. I also noticed something else that made my heart race with anticipation. Several people I didn't recognize were holding cameras and notepads, journalists from education publications and social justice magazines who had heard about the wedding through the network of people who had known my biological father. Word had somehow spread that this was more than just a society wedding, and the press was here to document whatever was about to unfold. My mother noticed the journalists too, and her face lit up with excitement. "Oh, Paloma. Look, there are reporters here. Finally, you're getting the kind of attention our family deserves. Maybe this wedding will put you in the social pages after all." I almost laughed at the irony. The press attention she was so excited about was indeed going to put me in the papers, but not for the reasons she imagined. The story they would write would be about heritage, truth, and the vindication of a daughter who had been underestimated her entire life. As I walked toward the cathedral entrance, I saw Alejandro waiting for me at the altar, looking handsome and nervous in his perfectly tailored suit. My heart swelled with love for this man who had chosen to love me exactly as I was, who supported my work and dreams without question, who understood that true worth had nothing to do with family money or social status. But I also saw my extended family filling the pews: aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had witnessed years of my mother's criticism and doubt about my choices. They were all here, dressed in their finest clothes, expecting a traditional wedding ceremony followed by polite conversation and familiar social dynamics. What they were about to witness instead was the most dramatic revelation in our family's history, a moment that would redefine everything they thought they knew about the Herrera family hierarchy and about the daughter who had always been considered the disappointment. As I prepared to walk down the aisle, I whispered to myself the words I had been practicing for weeks. Today, everyone will finally understand exactly what kind of girl I am, and why any man would be lucky to marry me. My mother, still fussing with my veil, had no idea that her daughter was about to transform from the family disappointment into its most distinguished member, and that her cruel words would be publicly answered in a way she would never forget. Little did anyone know that the mystery envelope from my grandmother and the central object it contained, that birth certificate revealing my true parentage, was about to change not just my wedding day, but the entire future of our family's story. The moment had arrived. As the wedding march began to play and I started my walk down the aisle, I could feel the weight of every eye in the cathedral upon me. My mother walked beside me, her arm linked through mine, playing the role of the proud mother despite her private reservations about my choice of husband. But halfway down the aisle, something unexpected happened that would accelerate my timeline for revelation. In the third row, I spotted a face that made my heart skip a beat, Licenciado Ramirez, Diego's lawyer, sitting with tears streaming down his cheeks. Beside him was an elderly woman I didn't recognize, holding a photograph against her chest. As we passed their row, the elderly woman stood up and called out in a voice that carried throughout the cathedral, "Paloma. Mija. You look exactly like your father did on his graduation day." The entire cathedral fell silent. My mother's grip on my arm tightened like a vice, and I could feel her body go rigid with shock and confusion. The woman continued, her voice filled with emotion. "Diego would be so proud to see his daughter marrying for love, just like he always dreamed." My mother whispered urgently in my ear, "Who is that woman? What is she talking about? Paloma, what is going on here?" I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw fear in her eyes for the first time in my life. He knew. Somehow in that moment she understood that her decades-old secret was about to be exposed in the most public way possible. "That's my father's sister, Mama," I said quietly, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "My real father's sister. The one you never told me about." The murmur that went through the cathedral was audible. Guests were turning to each other, whispering, trying to understand what they had just heard. My sisters, walking behind us as bridesmaids, looked completely bewildered. Roberto, the man who had raised me, was standing at the front of the church with an expression of growing comprehension and pain. But I continued walking toward Alejandro, who was waiting for me with a look of complete support and love. He had known about my discovery for months, had helped me plan this moment, had encouraged me to claim my truth in whatever way felt right to me. When we reached the altar, instead of immediately beginning the ceremony, I turned to face the congregation. The priest looked confused, but I had discussed this moment with him during our pre-wedding counseling, and he knew to give me space for what I needed to say. "Before we begin this ceremony," I announced, my voice carrying clearly throughout the cathedral, "I need to share something with all of you. Something about truth, about family, and about the power of love over social expectations." My mother tried to grab my arm. "Paloma, no. Not here. Not now. Please." But I gently pulled away from her and continued. "For 34 years, I have been told that I was the disappointment of this family. That I was too different, too stubborn, too focused on helping others instead of advancing socially. I was told repeatedly that no decent man would ever want to marry a girl like me." The silence in the cathedral was deafening. I could see journalists in the back taking notes, my extended family sitting with their mouths open, and my special guests from Oaxaca nodding with understanding and support. "What I discovered 6 months ago," I continued, reaching into my bouquet where I had hidden the documents, "is that being a girl like me is actually something to be incredibly proud of." I pulled out the birth certificate and held it up. This document shows that my biological father was Diego Morales, a man who dedicated his life to education and social justice. A man who received the National Education Award from the President of Mexico. A man who built schools for indigenous children and changed thousands of lives. The murmur in the cathedral grew louder. I could see my mother's face had gone completely white, and Roberto was staring at her with a look of betrayal and hurt that broke my heart. "Diego Morales never abandoned my mother, as I was always told," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "He fought for love, but my mother chose social status over the man who truly loved her. What she never told him was that she was carrying his child." I turned to face my mother directly. "Mama, you have spent my entire life punishing me for reminding you of the choice you made. Every time you looked at me, you saw the man you gave up for money and status. Every cruel word, every expression of disappointment, every time you told me no one would want to marry me, it was all because you couldn't face your own regret." Tears were streaming down my mother's face now, but I wasn't finished. "The most beautiful irony," I said, turning back to the congregation, "is that the man I never got to meet, my biological father, left me an inheritance that makes me more financially secure than anyone in this family. He saved money his entire life hoping to one day meet his daughter, and he left it all to support my work helping others." I gestured toward my special guests wearing blue ribbons. These distinguished educators and community leaders traveled from across Mexico to be here today. They knew Diego Morales. They benefited from his work. They're here to honor his memory and to celebrate his daughter's wedding. The transformation in the room was palpable. Suddenly, the people my mother had always looked down upon were revealed to be some of the most respected professionals in the country. The journalists were scribbling furiously, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. But the most powerful moment came when the elderly woman who had called out earlier Diego's sister, my aunt, stood up again and said in a voice that carried throughout the cathedral, "Diego always said his daughter would change the world, just like her father did. He was right. Look at the work she's done, the lives she's touched, the man who loves her for exactly who she is." I looked at Alejandro, who was beaming with pride and love. Then I looked back at my mother, who was now sobbing openly. "So when you ask what kind of girl I am," I said, my voice filled with strength and vindication, "I am Diego Morales' daughter. I am a woman who inherited a legacy of service, compassion, and impact. I am exactly the kind of girl that any good man would be honored to marry." The applause that erupted from my father's colleagues and the journalists was thunderous, but what struck me most was the look of complete shock and begrudging respect on my extended family's faces. The applause died down, but the tension in the cathedral was electric. I could see my mother struggling to maintain her composure, her carefully constructed social facade crumbling in front of everyone who mattered in our social circle. But what happened next would push our family drama to its absolute breaking point. Roberto, the man who had raised me as his own daughter, suddenly stepped forward from his position near the altar. His face was a mixture of pain, anger, and something else I couldn't quite identify. When he spoke, his voice carried throughout the entire cathedral. "Carmen," he said, addressing my mother directly, "is this true? Have you been lying to me for 35 years?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. My mother looked around desperately as if searching for an escape route, but she was trapped in front of hundreds of witnesses, including journalists who were documenting every moment of this unprecedented family revelation. "Roberto, please," she whispered, but her voice was barely audible. "Not here. Not now." But Roberto's pain was too raw, too immediate to be contained. "Not here. Not now," he repeated, his voice rising. When would have been the right time to tell me that the daughter I raised and loved isn't mine? When would have been the right time to explain why you've spent 34 years being cruel to an innocent child? The silence in the cathedral was deafening. I could feel the weight of hundreds of people holding their breath, witnessing the complete destruction of my family's carefully maintained public image. My sisters Sophia and Isabella looked like they were in shock. This revelation didn't just change my story, it changed theirs too. The family hierarchy they had always known, the assumptions they had made about their own superiority, everything was collapsing in real time. But the most devastating moment came when Roberto turned to face me, tears streaming down his face. "Paloma, Mija, I want you to know something. Even if you're not my biological daughter, you have always been the child I'm most proud of. Your compassion, your dedication to helping others, your strength in standing up for what's right, these are the qualities that matter. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from your mother's cruelty. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening." His words hit me like a physical blow, but not in a painful way. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and valued by the man who had raised me. The irony was overwhelming. In discovering that Roberto wasn't my biological father, I had found a deeper connection with him than I'd ever had before. But my mother's response to Roberto's declaration was what truly shocked everyone. Instead of shame or remorse, she lashed out with a venom that revealed the depth of her bitterness. "You want to know the truth?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the cathedral walls. "Fine. Yes, Diego is her father. Yes, I chose you for your money and your family name. But look what that choice got me, a daughter who embarrasses me at every turn, who throws away every advantage I tried to give her, who insists on working with poor people instead of living up to her potential." The gasp that went through the cathedral was audible. My mother had just confessed to 35 years of deception and revealed the cold calculation behind her marriage, all while insulting me and my life choices in front of hundreds of witnesses. But she wasn't finished. In her rage and humiliation, she said the words that would seal her fate and provide me with the most perfect vindication possible. "You think you've won something here, Paloma?" she continued, her voice shaking with fury. "You think this changes anything? You're still the same stubborn, difficult girl who chose to waste her life helping people who don't matter. An inheritance from a dead teacher doesn't change the fact that you've always been the disappointment of this family." The silence that followed was crushing. Even my mother seemed to realize she had gone too far, had revealed too much of her true character in front of people whose opinions mattered to her social standing. But what happened next was the moment I had been unconsciously preparing for my entire life. I looked at my mother with complete calm and said in a voice that carried clearly throughout the cathedral, "The only disappointment here, Mama, is a woman who chose money over love, status over integrity, and cruelty over compassion. You spent 34 years punishing me for your own cowardice, and now everyone can see exactly what kind of person you really are." Then I turned to address the entire congregation, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I am proud to be Diego Morales' daughter. I am proud to work with people who don't matter, according to my mother's standards. I am proud to have chosen love over social climbing, and I am grateful that my husband chose to marry exactly the kind of girl I am." The applause that erupted was thunderous, but this time it wasn't just from my father's colleagues. I could see members of my extended family clapping, journalists nodding with approval, and even some of my mother's society friends looking at her with newfound disgust. But the most powerful moment came when Diego's sister, my aunt, stood up again and said in a voice filled with emotion, "Carmen Herrera, you threw away the love of the best man I ever knew, and then you spent 30 years punishing his daughter for your own weakness. Diego is watching from heaven today and he's seeing his daughter marry for love, just like he always dreamed she would." The transformation in the cathedral was complete. My mother, who had arrived as the matriarch of a respected family, was now revealed as a woman who had built her entire life on deception and had poisoned her relationship with her daughter out of her own guilt and regret. As I looked around the cathedral, I could see that the power dynamics in our family had shifted permanently. The journalists were documenting everything, which meant this story would be in the papers within days. My mother's social standing was destroyed, but more importantly, I was finally free from the weight of her disapproval and cruelty. What I didn't know was that the climax was still coming, and that my mother would make one final desperate attempt to regain control, an attempt that would backfire so spectacularly that it would provide me with the most satisfying vindication of my entire life. In the aftermath of my mother's public meltdown, something unexpected began to happen. The distinguished guests from Oaxaca, the educators and community leaders who had known my biological father, started to stand one by one. They weren't leaving, they were showing their support, creating a visual representation of the legacy I had inherited. Dr. Maria Esperanza Gonzalez, a renowned education researcher, stood first. Then Professor Carlos Mendoza, who had co-founded rural schools with Diego. Then Ana Lucia Reyes, a former student of my father's who had become a federal education minister. One by one, these distinguished professionals rose to their feet, creating a sea of blue ribbons that represented everything my mother had tried to deny about my worth. But it was what happened next that would give me the strength I needed for the final confrontation. Alejandro, my husband-to-be, stepped down from the altar and walked over to take my hand. In front of everyone, he said loudly enough for the entire cathedral to hear, "Paloma Herrera, I have never been more proud to be marrying you than I am right now. Your courage, your integrity, and your refusal to be diminished by anyone's cruelty are exactly why I fell in love with you. You are the strongest, most compassionate woman I know, and I consider myself the luckiest man alive to call you my wife." His words triggered something in my mother that I hadn't expected. Perhaps it was seeing the respect and admiration in everyone's eyes. Perhaps it was realizing that her decades of criticism had been publicly proven wrong, but she made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, her voice echoing off the cathedral walls. "All of this drama over some teacher from Oaxaca. Paloma, you think you've accomplished something here, but you're still making the same mistake I made, choosing sentiment over sense. That inheritance won't last forever, and when it's gone, you'll understand what I've been trying to teach you." But her words had the opposite effect of what she intended. Instead of undermining me, they revealed the depth of her materialism and her complete inability to understand the value of the legacy I had inherited. Roberto, who had been silent since his initial outburst, finally spoke again. His voice was quiet but firm. "Carmen, stop. Just stop. Can't you see that everything you've said today has only proven how wrong you've been? Look around you. Look at the respect Paloma commands. Look at the man who loves her. Look at the legacy she's inherited. You've spent 34 years being wrong about your own daughter. The power of his words was amplified by the setting. Here we were in a cathedral filled with distinguished guests, journalists and family members, and the man who had raised me was publicly acknowledging that my mother's treatment of me had been not just cruel, but completely unjustified. But what gave me the final surge of confidence I needed was a moment that felt almost divinely orchestrated. The priest, who had been standing quietly throughout this entire dramatic revelation, stepped forward and said, "I have been conducting weddings in this cathedral for over 20 years. And I have never witnessed a more powerful demonstration of love triumphing over judgment. Paloma, your father Diego may not be here physically, but his spirit is clearly present in the love and respect of all these people who came to honor his memory and celebrate his daughter." The priest's words seemed to give everyone permission to fully embrace what was happening. The applause that followed was sustained and emotional, and I could see that even some of my mother's society friends were clapping, not for the social spectacle she had wanted, but for the triumph of truth and authentic love over pretense and cruelty. It was in that moment, surrounded by support and validation, that I made the decision to deliver my final definitive response to my mother. The response I had been unconsciously preparing for my entire life. I walked over to where she was standing, still defiant despite being thoroughly exposed and humiliated. I looked her directly in the eyes and said, in a voice that carried throughout the entire cathedral, "Mama, you told me my entire life that no one would marry a girl like me. Today, in front of everyone who matters to you socially, I want you to understand exactly what kind of girl I am." I gestured toward the distinguished educators still standing in support. "I am the kind of girl whose biological father dedicated his life to changing the world through education. I am the kind of girl who inherited not just money but a legacy of service and impact. I am the kind of girl who chose compassion over status, love over convenience and truth over comfortable lies." My voice grew stronger as I continued. "I am the kind of girl who built a career helping others despite your constant criticism. I am the kind of girl who earned the respect of teachers, community leaders and social justice advocates across Mexico. I am the kind of girl who attracted a man who loves me for my values, not my bank account." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the congregation. "And yes, Mama, I am exactly the kind of girl that any good man would be honored to marry. The problem was never that I was unmarriageable. The problem was that you spent 34 years trying to make me ashamed of being myself." The silence that followed was profound. I could see tears in the eyes of many guests, including some family members who were perhaps understanding for the first time the magnitude of what I had endured and overcome. But I wasn't finished. I had one more revelation that would complete my vindication. "There's something else you should know," I said, reaching into my purse for the final document I had been saving. "The inheritance from Diego isn't just money. He also left detailed instructions for a foundation to be established in my name, the Paloma Morales Foundation for Indigenous Education. It will be the largest privately funded education initiative in Mexico's history." I held up the foundation documents. "The announcement will be in tomorrow's newspapers, along with the full story of Diego Morales' legacy and his daughter's wedding. By this time tomorrow, everyone in Mexico City will know that the disappointment of the Herrera family is actually continuing one of the most important educational legacies in the country." The transformation in the cathedral was complete. My mother, who had built her identity around social status and family reputation, had been publicly revealed as cruel and calculating, while I had been elevated from family disappointment to national significance. As I prepared to deliver my final words before we continued with the wedding ceremony, I could see that I had achieved something more powerful than simple vindication. I had reclaimed my truth and my worth in the most public and dramatic way possible. What happened next was the moment I had been building toward my entire life. The complete public vindication that would forever change how my family and society viewed me. But it came from a source I could never have anticipated. As I stood there, having just announced the foundation that would bear my name, a commotion arose from the back of the cathedral. Someone was walking quickly down the aisle, and as the figure came into focus, gasps echoed throughout the building. It was Secretario de Education Dr. Patricia Vasquez, Mexico's Minister of Education, accompanied by two officials and a photographer. She had somehow learned about what was happening and had come personally to witness this moment. "Disculpen la interruption," she called out as she approached. But I couldn't let this day pass without personally congratulating Paloma Morales, yes Morales, on continuing her father's extraordinary legacy. The entire cathedral fell silent. Having the Minister of Education arrive unannounced at my wedding was unprecedented, and the symbolic power of her presence was overwhelming. Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice carrying clearly throughout the cathedral. Diego Morales was not just a teacher, he was a national treasure. His innovative methods for indigenous education have been adopted throughout Latin America. When we learned that his daughter was getting married and announcing the establishment of the Paloma Morales Foundation, the president himself asked me to come and offer the government's full support. My mother's face had gone completely ashen. The woman she had spent decades dismissing as a disappointment was being personally honored by the highest education official in the country. But Dr. Vasquez wasn't finished. "Paloma, your work in community development has already caught our attention. The programs you've established in Iztapalapa and Nezahualcóyotl are models we want to replicate nationally. The foundation your father left for you will allow us to expand these initiatives beyond anything we previously thought possible." She then turned to address the entire congregation. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing not just a wedding, but the launch of what will become the most significant educational philanthropy in Mexico's modern history. Paloma Morales is going to change thousands of lives, just like her father did." The applause that erupted was thunderous, but what struck me most was the look of complete shock and defeat on my mother's face. Every cruel word she had ever spoken, every time she had called me a disappointment, every moment she had suggested I was wasting my potential, all of it was being publicly and dramatically proven wrong by the highest authorities in the country. But the climax wasn't over yet. Dr. Vasquez reached into her briefcase and pulled out an official document. "Paloma, I have here a presidential appointment naming you as Special Advisor for Indigenous Education Development. Your first project will be working directly with the ministry to establish community education centers throughout rural Mexico." The moment the minister handed me that official appointment, the transformation in the cathedral was complete and irreversible. I was no longer just the family disappointment who had chosen social work over social climbing. I was now a presidential appointee, a foundation director, and the heir to one of Mexico's most respected educational legacies. But what happened next provided the most satisfying moment of vindication I could ever have imagined. My mother, faced with the complete destruction of her narrative about my worthlessness, made one final desperate attempt to save face. "Well," she said, her voice shaky but still defiant, "I suppose this changes things. Perhaps I was too hasty in my judgments about Paloma's choices." The audacity of her attempt to suddenly claim credit or minimize her years of cruelty triggered something in me that had been building for 3 decades. I turned to face her, and in a voice that carried throughout the entire cathedral, I delivered the words that would define this moment forever. "No, Mama. This doesn't change anything about what you did to me. For 34 years, you told me that nadie y casara con una chica como yo, that no one would marry a girl like me. Today, in front of everyone who matters, I want you to understand exactly what you said." I gestured toward Alejandro, toward the distinguished guests, toward the Minister of Education still standing beside me. "You were wrong about everything. Wrong about my worth, wrong about my potential, wrong about my character, and wrong about my future. But most importantly, you were wrong about what kind of girl I am." I stepped closer to her, my voice growing stronger and more decisive. "I am exactly the kind of girl that an amazing man would fight to marry. I am exactly the kind of girl who deserves respect, love, and support. I am exactly the kind of girl who was always destined for greatness, not despite your cruelty but in spite of it." The silence in the cathedral was absolute. Every eye was fixed on this moment of truth between mother and daughter, this final accounting for decades of emotional abuse and diminishment. "The only person who should be embarrassed here today," I continued, "is a mother who spent 34 years punishing her daughter for her own cowardice and regret. Everyone here can now see exactly what kind of woman you are, just like they can see exactly what kind of woman I've become." I turned away from her to address the entire congregation one final time. "My mother told me no one would marry a girl like me. Today, a wonderful man is marrying me precisely because I am exactly the kind of girl I am." The kind who inherited Diego Morales' legacy of service. The kind who will use her platform to change lives. The kind who chose love over status and truth over comfort. The applause that followed was not just supportive, it was victorious. It was the sound of justice being served, of truth triumphing over years of lies and manipulation. It was the sound of a daughter finally being vindicated in the most complete and public way possible. As the Minister of Education joined the applause and my biological father's colleagues rose to their feet once again, I realized I had achieved something more powerful than simple revenge. I had reclaimed my truth, my worth, and my future, all while demonstrating the very qualities my mother had spent years trying to diminish. The wedding ceremony that followed was unlike anything anyone in that cathedral had ever witnessed. Father Miguel, clearly moved by everything he had observed, delivered a homily about truth, forgiveness, and the power of love to triumph over years of pain. As Alejandro and I exchanged vows, I felt the weight of 3 decades of self-doubt finally lifting from my shoulders. When Alejandro said, "I take you, Paloma Morales, to be my wife," emphasizing my true surname, the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. I was finally claiming my real identity, my authentic heritage, and my genuine worth. The reception at the Hotel Casa Magna was a celebration unlike any my family had ever hosted. Instead of the typical society small talk and social posturing, the conversations centered around education, community development, and social justice. The journalists who had documented the cathedral revelations were now interviewing my biological father's colleagues about Diego's legacy and my plans for the foundation. My mother sat at the family table looking completely isolated. Her society friends who had witnessed her public humiliation and cruel behavior kept their distance. Even my sister seemed unsure how to interact with her after seeing her true character revealed so dramatically. But what struck me most was how Roberto, the man who had raised me, seemed liberated by the truth. He spent the evening talking with Alejandro and the education officials, clearly proud of the woman I had become and relieved to finally understand the dynamics that had shaped our family for so long. The most powerful moment of the reception came when Dr. Vasquez asked to make a toast. Standing before all our guests, she said, "Today we witness something extraordinary, not just a wedding, but the public recognition of a legacy that will impact Mexican education for generations." Paloma Morales represents the best of what her father stood for: service, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to lifting others up. She paused, looking directly at my mother before continuing. "We also witnessed a reminder that a person's worth is not determined by their family's opinion, but by their actions, their character, and their contribution to society. Paloma, your father Diego would be incredibly proud of the woman you've become and the impact you're going to have." As the evening progressed, I watched my mother's social world crumble around her. The story of the wedding drama was already spreading through Mexico City's elite circles, and I could see other guests whispering and looking at her with a mixture of shock and disapproval. The reputation she had spent decades building was destroyed in a single afternoon. But I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only relief that I was finally free from her toxic influence and cruel judgments. 3 months have passed since that extraordinary wedding day, and the transformation in my life has been nothing short of miraculous. The Paloma Morales Foundation officially launched 6 weeks ago with a ceremony attended by the President of Mexico himself. The news coverage was extensive, with articles in every major newspaper celebrating the continuation of Diego Morales' educational legacy through his daughter. My work as Special Advisor for Indigenous Education Development has already resulted in the establishment of 12 new community learning centers across Oaxaca, Chiapas, and Guerrero. The program has been so successful that we're expanding to 20 additional states next year. Alejandro and I have settled into a beautiful house in Culiacan, not far from where my grandmother Elena lived. We've converted one of the rooms into an office where I coordinate foundation activities, and the walls are covered with photos of the schools and communities we're supporting. The most surprising development has been the outpouring of support from people across Mexico who heard about our wedding story. Hundreds of teachers, community leaders, and former students of my father have reached out to share their memories of Diego and to offer their help with the foundation. I've learned more about my biological father in the past 3 months than I had known in my entire previous life. Roberto has become one of my strongest supporters. He visits regularly and has even started volunteering with some of our community programs. The revelation about my parentage rather than driving us apart has actually brought us closer together. He recently told me that knowing I wasn't his biological daughter made him even prouder of the woman I'd become, because it meant my character was purely my own choice. My sisters Sophia and Isabella have also begun to rebuild their relationships with me. The dramatic revelation at the wedding forced them to confront their own assumptions about family hierarchy and success. Isabella actually asked to volunteer at one of our clinics in Nezahualcóyotl, saying she wanted to understand the work that made me so passionate. As for my mother, she has become a virtual recluse. The social consequences of her public behavior at the wedding have been severe. Many of her society friends have distanced themselves, and she's been dropped from several charity boards and social committees. Roberto has told me she speaks often about wanting to apologize, but so far she hasn't found the courage to face me directly. The most meaningful moment of these past 3 months came when I received a package from Diego's former students, now successful professionals across Mexico. Inside was a leather-bound book containing hundreds of letters and photos documenting my father's impact on their lives. The inscription read, "For Paloma Morales, who carries her father's heart and continues his mission. We are proud to call you Diego's daughter." Reading those letters, I finally understood that my mother's cruel words about me being unmarriageable and worthless were never about me at all. They were about her own pain, regret, and inability to face the consequences of her choices. She had spent 34 years punishing me for her own cowardice, but in the end the truth set us both free. As I sit here in my office, surrounded by plans for new schools and community programs, married to a man who loves me completely, and carrying forward a legacy that will impact thousands of lives, I realize that my mother was right about one thing. No decent man would want to marry the kind of girl she tried to make me into: bitter, diminished, and ashamed of my own values. But an extraordinary man was proud to marry exactly the kind of girl I really am: Diego Morales' daughter, a woman who inherited a legacy of service, compassion, and unwavering commitment to justice. The girl my mother said no one would marry became a woman that Mexico's most respected educators celebrate, that the government seeks to partner with, and that a wonderful man was honored to call his wife. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had never found that mysterious envelope in my grandmother's jewelry box, if I had never learned the truth about my heritage, if I had continued accepting my mother's version of my worth. But then I remember that even before I knew about Diego, I was already living his values, already choosing service over status, already becoming exactly the kind of woman he had hoped his daughter would be. The truth didn't change who I was. It simply gave me the courage to fully embrace what I had always been. Have you ever discovered something about your family history that completely changed how you saw yourself? Have you ever had to choose between conforming to others' expectations and staying true to your own values? I'd love to hear your stories of finding your authentic self despite family pressure, because as I've learned, sometimes the most beautiful vindication comes not from proving others wrong, but from finally understanding that you were right about yourself all along.